My parents stole my $150,000 college fund for my sister's house, so I made them regret it and then Hi, everyone. I never thought I'd be writing something like this, but here we are. My name's Megan, I'm 17, and my whole world fell apart a few weeks ago when I discovered that my parents, two people who were supposed to protect and support me, had stolen my college fund. The very same fund my grandparents worked so hard to leave for me. And why did they do it? To buy my sister a house. Let me start from the beginning. Growing up in Cleveland, Ohio, my family seemed normal on the surface. My dad, David, works in construction, and my mom, Catherine, works part-time at a local florist shop. My older sister Amy, who's 26 now, was always the golden child. You know the type. Perfect grades, perfect hair, perfect everything. She's a second-grade teacher, and while I don't have any real issue with her personally, I've spent my entire life in her shadow. Whenever Amy did something, it was a huge celebration. Straight as? Mom and Dad would throw a dinner party to celebrate. She brought home a trophy from a dance recital. Dad put it on the mantle for everyone to see. Meanwhile, when I brought home my report card with all A's and 1B+, I got a good job, kid. Keep it up. It wasn't abuse. It wasn't screaming or hitting. But it was always clear to me that Amy was their star, and I was there. My grandparents, Dad's parents, lived in Charleston, South Carolina. We didn't see them much since it was about a 10-hour drive, but I adored them. My grandma, Evelyn, was one of the kindest people I'd ever known. She baked cookies whenever we visited, sent handwritten birthday cards every year, and always told me how proud she was of me. My grandpa, Robert, was quieter, but he had this warm smile that made you feel safe. They were old-fashioned people who saved every penny, built their lives from nothing, and wanted to pass down something meaningful. 3 years ago, Grandpa passed away. It was hard on all of us, but especially Grandma. Then last year, she passed too. Losing both of them so close together felt like a punch to the gut. After Grandma's funeral, the will came out. My grandparents left their house and savings to my parents, their jewelry and heirlooms to Amy, and for me, something I never expected, a $150,000 college fund. I cried when I found out. I'd been so close to Grandma, and knowing that she and Grandpa believed in my future meant everything to me. The will was clear. The money was to be used solely for my education. Since I was under 18, my parents were given control over the fund to manage it responsibly until I started college. At the time, I didn't think twice about it. Why would I? They were my parents. I trusted them. But looking back now, I should have seen the signs. Over the past year, Amy and her boyfriend Tom, he's 27 and works as a zoo handler, had been talking nonstop about buying a house. They'd been renting a tiny apartment in Cincinnati and always complained about how it's just throwing money away. Every time we visited them, Tom would say things like, "A house is a smart investment, but it's just not in the cards yet." My parents would nod sympathetically and tell Amy, "We'll figure something out." At the time, I thought nothing of it. Buying a house is hard, and my sister's not exactly rich. I focused on my own plans. I've always been a straight-A student, and college was something I'd worked toward my entire life. For the past few months, I've been applying to schools across the country, excited for the next chapter. Everything changed about a month ago. I was sitting at the dinner table with my parents, going over some college application fees, when I brought up the fund. I asked if everything was ready since I'd need it soon for tuition deposits. My dad just grunted, "Don't worry about it," and my mom smiled too tightly and said, "Just focus on your studies for now." Their reaction bugged me. Something felt off. My parents aren't the type to hide things, but it was like they were dodging the question. I let it slide that night, telling myself I was being paranoid, but the feeling didn't go away. The following week, I brought it up again, this time more directly. "I need to know the money's there. College isn't cheap, and I can't mess this up." That's when it happened. My mom glanced at my dad, and then, as casually as if she were talking about the weather, she said, "We used the money, Megan. It went toward helping Amy buy her house." At first, I thought I misheard her. "What?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "We used the college money," she repeated, slower this time. "Amy needed it, and it's not like you can't take out a loan like everyone else." I froze. My ears started ringing. I looked at my dad, hoping he'd tell me this was all some kind of misunderstanding, but he just shrugged and said, "It wouldn't be fair for Amy to struggle while you get a free ride." I don't even remember standing up, but suddenly I was on my feet, shaking. "How could you do this? That money wasn't yours." I screamed. "Grandma and Grandpa left it for me." My mom rolled her eyes like I was throwing a tantrum over a broken toy. "Stop being dramatic. Amy and Tom needed the house. You'll figure something out. Everyone else does." "Figure it out?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You stole from me." That's when I threatened to sue them. I know I'm just a teenager, and I don't exactly have a lawyer in my back pocket, but I didn't care. "What you did is illegal. I'll take you to court if I have to." And you know what they did? They laughed. My dad actually laughed in my face. "With what money, Megan?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. "You can't even afford a lawyer." I felt humiliated, powerless, and betrayed all at once. I stormed to my room, slammed the door shut, and collapsed onto my bed, sobbing until I couldn't breathe. That night, something in me snapped. I couldn't stay there. I couldn't live under the same roof as people who thought so little of me. My grandparents had trusted my parents to protect my future, and instead, they sold it out for Amy's white picket fence dream. I knew I had to leave. Early the next morning, before my parents were awake, I packed a backpack, clothes, my phone, and the little bit of cash I had saved from my part-time job at a local bookstore. I didn't know where I was going to go, but I didn't care. Anywhere was better than this. When I passed through the kitchen, I could hear them laughing about something. My mom's voice floated toward me, cheerful and carefree, as if they hadn't just shattered my world. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't even look at them. I just walked out the front door. The only place I could think to go was my best friend's house. Her parents, thankfully, are saints. When I showed up on their doorstep, tear-streaked and shaking, they didn't ask questions. They just welcomed me in, gave me food, and let me sleep. That night, lying in their guest room, I realized I couldn't fight this alone. I needed help. I pulled out my phone and went to Facebook, scrolling through family names I barely knew. That's when I found Uncle Rob, my dad's cousin who lives in Chicago. I don't remember much about him except that he came to Grandma's funeral and shook my hand with this firm, no-nonsense grip. I typed out a message, "Uncle Rob, I really need help. My parents stole my college fund. I don't know what to do." I hit send and prayed he'd answer. When I woke up the next morning, sunlight was pouring through the curtains of my best friend's guest room, but I didn't feel any warmth from it. For a moment, I forgot where I was, and then everything came crashing back. My parents, the stolen money, their laughter ringing in my ears. I felt sick. I grabbed my phone off the nightstand and checked my messages, half expecting silence. Instead, there it was, a reply from Uncle Rob. My heart raced as I opened it. "Call me. I'll take care of this." I didn't waste a second. My hands were trembling as I dialed his number, stepping outside onto the porch so I wouldn't disturb my friend's family. It rang twice before I heard a gruff but calm voice say, "Megan?" Hearing someone address me like I mattered made my throat tighten, but I swallowed it down. "Hi, Uncle Rob. I don't know where to start," I said, my voice shaky. "Start at the beginning," he replied. "Tell me everything." So I did. I told him about my grandparents' will, the college fund, my parents' betrayal, and the way they'd laughed at me when I stood up for myself. I tried to stay composed, but halfway through, my voice cracked and I couldn't stop a few tears from falling. Uncle Rob didn't interrupt me once. When I finally stopped talking, there was silence on the other end for a moment, and I held my breath, worried he wouldn't believe me. "This isn't right," he finally said, his tone firm and full of resolve. "They had no right to touch that money. Don't worry, Megan. I'm going to handle this." "What are we going to do?" I asked, still unsure what handling it meant. "I'll call the executor of your grandparents' will and confirm the details. Your parents won't be able to wiggle their way out of this." He paused. "In the meantime, don't go back home. Stay where you are. I'll take care of everything." A wave of relief washed over me. Someone believed me. Someone was on my side. Later that day, my parents must have realized I wasn't coming back, because my phone started blowing up with messages. At first, They were angry. Where are you? You're being ridiculous. Come home now. Then they shifted to guilt-tripping. We're your parents, Megan. How could you betray us like this? Do you know how much stress you're causing, Amy? I didn't respond. I couldn't. Every time I read their words, my chest tightened, and the anger I felt the night before came rushing back. They had no right to make me feel like the villain in this. Around noon, Uncle Rob called me back. I spoke with the executor, he said. You were telling the truth. The fund was legally protected, and what your parents did is very illegal. So, what happens now? I asked, gripping my phone tightly. I've already called a lawyer, Uncle Rob replied. We'll send your parents a formal notice. If they don't return the money, we'll take them to court. The words "take them to court" sounded huge, like a tidal wave about to crash over everything I knew. It felt surreal. Was this really happening? Were my parents going to face actual consequences for what they did? I need you to stay strong, Megan, Uncle Rob said. This won't be easy. Your parents are going to fight back, and they'll probably try to guilt you into dropping this. Don't let them win. You have the law on your side, and you have me on your side. I hung up the phone feeling both terrified and hopeful. Terrified because I knew how my parents operated. They'd lie, manipulate, and twist everything to make me look like the bad guy. Hopeful because, for once, someone was standing up for me. That evening, I told my best friend's parents what was happening. I didn't give them all the details, just enough for them to understand why I couldn't go home. They were kind, almost overwhelmingly so, offering to let me stay as long as I needed. But it didn't feel right freeloading off them forever. The next day, Uncle Rob called with more news. I found you a place to stay, he said. It's a small apartment in Columbus. It's temporary, but it'll give you space to think and figure out your next steps. I didn't know what to say. How? How did you do that so fast? I have friends, Megan, and I'm not about to let you feel like you're alone in this. A day later, Uncle Rob picked me up in his car, a sturdy, older sedan that smelled faintly of coffee, and we drove to Columbus. The whole ride, he talked to me about my grandparents, about how proud they'd been of me and how hard they'd worked to save that money. Your grandparents believed in you, he said. They knew you were going to do something incredible with your life. Don't let anyone take that away from you. The apartment was small but clean, and my new roommate, Heather, greeted me at the door with a warm smile. She was a couple of years older than me, in her first year of community college, and when Uncle Rob explained my situation to her earlier, she hadn't asked questions. She didn't now, either. Hey, she said, holding out a hand. You must be Megan. I've got some extra blankets if you need them. I nodded, managing a weak smile. Thanks. I really appreciate it. After Uncle Rob left, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the bare walls of my new room. I should have felt better, safer, at least, but instead, I felt hollow. How had it come to this? How had my own parents thrown me away so easily? Late that night, after Heather went to bed, I finally let myself cry. Quiet, muffled sobs that I hadn't been able to let out all day. I kept hearing my mom's voice. You'll figure it out. It's not like you can't take a loan. Did she think I was worthless? Did they both think that? Or had I just always been expendable to them? The next morning, I woke up to another flurry of texts. This time, my parents had switched tactics. We can fix this as a family. You don't need to involve lawyers, Megan. Just come home and let's talk. Right. Like I was supposed to trust them after everything they'd done. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the messages to Uncle Rob. A minute later, he called me. You did the right thing, Megan. Don't let their guilt-tripping get to you. What if they're right? I whispered, my voice shaking. What if this does tear the family apart? Uncle Rob's voice was calm but firm. They made that choice when they took your money. You're just standing up for yourself. For the first time in my life, I believed it, and I wasn't going to stop. The next few days passed in a blur. I tried to settle into the apartment, but everything felt strange. Heather was kind, but we didn't talk much. She'd leave for her classes and work shifts, and I'd sit in my new room, staring at the walls or refreshing my phone like I was expecting something. I didn't even know what I was waiting for. News, maybe, or just the illusion that things were moving forward. Uncle Rob kept me updated every day, though. He was efficient, and he didn't let me feel forgotten. The lawyer sent your parents an official notice, he told me one afternoon. They know we're serious now. What happens next? I asked. They'll have the chance to settle this quietly. If they refuse, we'll escalate to mediation. If that doesn't work, we go to court. The word court made my stomach twist. It felt too big, too serious. I never imagined I'd be here, 17 years old, tangled in a legal battle against my own parents. That night, I got the first real sign that things were moving. My phone buzzed, and when I checked it, I saw a text from my mom. We need to talk. Stop this nonsense, Megan. You're blowing this out of proportion. I stared at the message, my hands trembling. Before I could even process it, another one popped up. You're ruining the family. Can't you just think about Amy? She's devastated. I dropped the phone onto my bed like it burned me. I could feel the anger rising in my chest, but beneath it was something worse, guilt. They knew exactly how to get to me. They'd done this my whole life. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Instead, I sent screenshots to Uncle Rob. He called me almost immediately. They're trying to manipulate you, Megan, he said firmly. This isn't about Amy. It's about them covering up what they did. I know, I whispered, but it's still hard to read. That's how they operate. They'll twist everything to make you feel like the bad guy. Don't let them. I promised I wouldn't, but that night, lying in bed in the dark, their words echoed in my head. You're ruining the family. Amy is devastated. I couldn't shake it. I knew I was right, but part of me still wondered. Was this my fault somehow? The next morning, Uncle Rob called again with an update. Mediation's been set up, he said. Your parents are cooperating for now. The word mediation sounded so formal. It made everything feel real in a way it hadn't before. Do I have to be there? I asked quietly. You do, he replied. But don't worry. The lawyer will handle most of it. You just need to stay calm and tell the truth. 2 days later, the mediation began. I sat in Uncle Rob's living room, staring at my laptop as the video call loaded. My lawyer sat beside me, calm and collected, while Uncle Rob paced in the background, muttering to himself like he was ready to fight someone. Then the screen connected, and there they were, my parents, sitting at a table in their living room. My mom looked pale and tired, like she hadn't slept in days. My dad had his arms crossed and wouldn't meet my eyes. For a second, I almost felt sorry for them. Then I remembered why we were here. The mediator started by explaining how the process would work. My parents' lawyer spoke first, talking about how my parents had acted in good faith to help the family. He made it sound so reasonable, so harmless, like this whole mess was just one big misunderstanding. Then it was our lawyer's turn. He didn't mince words. The will was clear, he said firmly. The money was for Megan's education and nothing else. What her parents did was illegal, and they had no justification for it. I glanced at my parents. My mom looked like she might cry, but my dad's expression hardened. Megan, the mediator said gently, is there anything you'd like to add? My hands were clammy, but I forced myself to speak. That money wasn't for Amy's house. My grandparents saved it for me, for my education. They trusted my parents to do the right thing, and they didn't. My voice didn't shake, and for the first time, I felt a small spark of power. My parents didn't look at me as I spoke. When my mom finally opened her mouth, her voice wavered. We thought Megan would understand. Families help each other. I clenched my fists under the table. Did you think of me as family when you took the money? She didn't answer. My dad, however, jumped in, his tone sharp and defensive. Do you really want to destroy your sister's future over this? She doesn't deserve this stress, Megan. You're punishing her for something that isn't her fault. That hit me like a slap. My chest tightened, and for a second, I couldn't breathe. Before I could respond, our lawyer cut in. This isn't about Megan's sister. It's about the theft of funds meant for Megan's education. My dad grumbled something under his breath and fell silent. After the session ended, I closed my laptop and let out a shaky breath. Uncle Rob sat down next to me, putting a reassuring hand on my shoulder. You did great, kid. You didn't let them push you around. I nodded, but I didn't feel great. Seeing my parents again, Hearing them twist the situation and blame me made me feel sick all over again. Later that night, I got a message from Amy. Her name on the screen made my heart sink, but I opened it anyway. Hey, I just found out what Mom and Dad did. I had no idea the money was yours. I'm really sorry, Megan. I thought they were helping me out with their savings. I didn't mean to take anything from you. I sat there, staring at her words. A part of me wanted to believe her. I typed back a short response. Thanks for saying that. It means a lot. I didn't know if she was being genuine or just trying to clear her conscience, but for now, I let it go. Amy wasn't the one who took the money. My parents were, and I wasn't done fighting them yet. The next few days dragged on like a heavy weight I couldn't shake. My parents' faces during the mediation replayed in my head on an endless loop. My mom's wavering voice, my dad's cold stare, their lawyer trying to spin it like I was the one causing all the chaos. I kept thinking about what Dad had said. Do you really want to destroy your sister's future? Like this was all my fault. Like I was the villain for standing up for myself. But I wasn't backing down. Uncle Rob checked in with me every day, and it became my lifeline. His voice on the phone steadied me when I started to doubt myself. They're panicking, Megan. That's why they're acting this way. They know they messed up, but instead of admitting it, they're trying to guilt you into letting it go. I knew he was right, but it didn't make it any easier when I got their next round of texts. My mom's message read, "We're really sorry for how things turned out. You know we love you, don't you? We were just trying to help Amy. She's struggling, and as parents, we couldn't ignore that." Then my dad chimed in with a follow-up. "You don't understand how hard this is for Amy. She's crushed. You're ruining her dream over a misunderstanding." I couldn't believe it. They still didn't get it. After everything they'd done, they were still trying to make me feel like I was the problem. I stared at their messages for a long time, my anger boiling. I wanted to scream, to throw my phone across the room, but instead, I did what Uncle Rob told me to do. I screenshotted the texts and sent them straight to him. A minute later, my phone buzzed. "You're doing the right thing, Megan," Uncle Rob said firmly. "Don't let their guilt-tripping get into your head. They're only sorry because they got caught." I knew he was right, but it still stung. For so long, all I'd wanted was for my parents to see me, to care about me. Now, here they were, acting like I was destroying their lives. Did they even care about how much they'd hurt me? A couple of days later, Uncle Rob called with another update. "They're stalling," he said. "Your parents' lawyer is trying to drag this out, probably hoping you'll cave and take whatever deal they offer. Don't give in. The law's on your side." That night, I sat alone in the apartment, my legs curled under me on the couch. Heather was working late, so I had the place to myself. I thought about my grandparents, about how hard they'd worked to save that money for me. I remembered my grandma hugging me and saying, "You're going to do amazing things, sweetheart." They believed in me. They gave me that money so I could build a future for myself, and my parents had thrown it away like it was nothing. It was hard not to let the guilt creep in, though. My parents had always made me feel like I was second place to Amy, and this whole situation just drove that point home. My sister got a house. I got laughed at for demanding what was rightfully mine. The next day, things escalated again. I woke up to find a new message from Amy. I hadn't heard from her since her apology earlier, so seeing her name on my phone screen made my heart sink. This time, the tone was different. "Look, I know Mom and Dad messed up, but you don't have to take this so far. They're trying to fix things, and now they're panicking because of Uncle Rob. Can't you just take their deal and let them pay for your college instead of suing them? I never asked for any of this, you know." I stared at her words for a long time. My hands felt shaky as I typed back my response. "I'm sorry you're in the middle of this, Amy, but this isn't my fault. Mom and Dad crossed a line. I'm not taking anything too far. I'm just asking for what's mine. They need to fix it." She left me on read. That evening, Uncle Rob called again. "Their lawyer has been pushing for mediation one more time," he said. "It's probably their last chance to settle before we go to court. Do you think they'll settle?" I asked. "They don't have much of a choice," he replied. "But don't get your hopes up. They might keep trying to guilt you into backing down." I knew he was right, but I was tired. Tired of the fight, tired of the messages, tired of feeling like the bad guy in a situation I didn't create. But then I thought about what Uncle Rob had told me before. They're counting on you feeling guilty. Don't let them win. I wasn't going to let them win. The second mediation session took place 2 days later. This time, I wasn't nervous. I felt calm, focused, and ready. As the call started, my parents appeared on the screen again. They looked different this time. Defeated, maybe. My mom's eyes were red like she'd been crying, and my dad was rubbing his forehead like the world's biggest headache had settled between his temples. Their lawyer started again with the same excuses, the same they acted in good faith nonsense. I barely heard him. I kept my eyes on my parents, watching their faces as the weight of their choices settled in. Finally, the mediator asked if I had anything to say. I took a deep breath and looked straight into the camera. I want the money back, I said clearly. That's it. My mom broke down almost immediately, tears streaming down her face. We just thought we were helping the family, she said through hiccuping sobs. Why can't you see that we were only trying to do what's best for everyone? I didn't flinch. You weren't helping the family, I said, my voice steady. You were helping Amy at my expense. My dad jumped in, his tone sharp. Look, we get it. We made a mistake, okay? But do you really have to ruin your sister's life over this? That was it. That was the moment I snapped. Ruin her life? I shot back, my voice rising. I'm not the one who decided to take the money. That was your choice. Don't put this on me. The room went silent. My parents' lawyer looked visibly uncomfortable, and for the first time, I saw my dad's confidence crack. After the session ended, I closed the laptop and let out a long breath. Uncle Rob sat down beside me, his face calm but serious. They're running out of options, Megan, he said quietly. They're realizing how deep a hole they've dug for themselves. I nodded, too drained to say much of anything. My parents could cry, yell, or blame me all they wanted, but I wasn't backing down. This wasn't about ruining anyone's life. It was about reclaiming what was mine, and I wasn't giving up. The morning after the second mediation, I woke up to a text from Uncle Rob. It was short, but it hit me like a jolt of coffee. They're cracking. Stay strong. Call me later. I sat up in bed, my heart racing. I knew this was coming, but seeing it in black and white made it feel real. My parents, who had spent weeks blaming me, guilt-tripping me, and pretending they'd done nothing wrong, were starting to break under the pressure. Heather came out of her room, still in her pajamas, and saw me staring at my phone. Everything okay? She asked, yawning. Yeah, I said, still processing. Uncle Rob thinks my parents are giving in. She poured herself a cup of coffee and sat across from me at the table. They're going to have to. You've got them cornered. I managed a small smile, but it didn't feel like a victory yet. It doesn't feel good, though. I didn't want any of this to happen. Heather shrugged. Sometimes standing up for yourself is messy. Doesn't mean it's wrong. I let her words sink in as I sipped my water, grateful for her calm energy. It reminded me that no matter how bad my parents made me feel, I wasn't doing anything wrong. Later that afternoon, Uncle Rob called. His voice sounded lighter than it had in days, like he could finally see the light at the end of the tunnel. I just spoke to their lawyer, he said. They're considering settling out of court. They know they won't win if this goes to trial. What does that mean? I asked cautiously. It means they'll agree to return the money in full if we drop the lawsuit. I exhaled, letting out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. So it's almost over? Almost, Uncle Rob said. They're stalling for time, but don't let that get to you. They're desperate, Megan. They'll try one last push to make you back down, but don't give in. I felt a mix of emotions, relief, exhaustion, and just a bit of anger. My parents had put me through hell. All this time, instead of owning up to what they did, they had fought me, lied to me, and blamed me. And now, when they were finally cornered, they wanted to act like they were the victims. Uncle Rob was right. I couldn't let their desperation sway me. As if on cue, that evening, my phone buzzed with another message from my mom. We're begging you. Please call off Uncle Rob. We can't take this anymore. Sarah is devastated, and we're falling apart as a family. You're destroying us. I stared at the screen, my chest tightening. Destroying them? Had they forgotten what they did to me? Did they honestly believe I was the villain here? I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the message to Uncle Rob. "They're still at it," I texted him. He replied almost immediately. "Ignore them. This is the final stretch." That night, I sat in the kitchen with Heather as we made ramen together, a cheap and simple dinner that had already become our routine. She noticed I was quieter than usual. "What's on your mind?" she asked. "My mom sent me another text," I admitted, stirring my noodles. "They're still trying to guilt me, saying I'm destroying the family." Heather looked up, her face serious. "Do you believe that?" "No," I said quickly. "But it still hurts." She nodded, leaning against the counter. "That's because you're not like them. You actually care about people. They don't know how to handle someone standing up to them, so they're trying to make you feel small." I looked at her, surprised by how much she understood. "You're stronger than you think, Megan," she added. "Most people would have given up by now." The next morning, Uncle Rob called again with news. "Mediation is set for tomorrow. This is it. If they don't agree to return the money, we'll move forward with the lawsuit. Be ready for anything." "Do you think they'll give in?" I asked. "I do," he said firmly. "But even if they don't, we're ready. You've done everything right." The following day, I sat in front of my laptop, my heart pounding as I joined the mediation call. My lawyer was there, calm as always, while Uncle Rob sat beside me, a steady presence that kept me grounded. My parents appeared on the screen, looking smaller than ever. My mom's face was drawn and pale, and my dad looked like he hadn't shaved in days. They wouldn't look at me directly, their gazes fixed on the table in front of them. The mediator started the session. My parents' lawyer cleared his throat and spoke first. "After reviewing the situation, my clients have decided to return the full amount of the college fund." I blinked, my mind struggling to process what I just heard. It felt so simple after everything. I glanced at Uncle Rob, who gave me a small nod. The mediator asked my lawyer to confirm. "We'll need the terms in writing, but we're satisfied with that outcome," my lawyer said smoothly. My mom's voice cracked as she finally spoke. "Megan, we're sorry. We didn't mean for things to go this far." I didn't say anything. What could I say? That I forgave them? I wasn't sure I ever could. My dad spoke next, his tone flat and tired. "We just thought you'd understand. Family helps family." I looked straight at the screen, my voice steady. "You didn't help me. You stole from me. There's a difference." They didn't respond. When the session ended, I sat back in my chair, feeling a strange mixture of relief and exhaustion. Uncle Rob turned to me, his expression proud. "You did it, kid. It's over." I nodded, but I couldn't bring myself to smile. "I don't feel like I won," I admitted quietly. "You didn't win against them," Uncle Rob said. "You won for yourself. And that's what matters." That night, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, letting it all sink in. It was finally over. The money my grandparents had worked so hard to save, the money they left for me to build my future, was coming back. My parents had fought tooth and nail to take it from me, but I hadn't let them. For the first time in weeks, I felt a little bit of peace. I didn't know what would happen next with my parents, or if they'd ever truly understand what they'd done. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't powerless anymore.